Welcome to our discussion, Supporting and Strengthening Minority-Owned Business During and After the Pandemic, part of the Milken Institute's conference call series. Each week, leaders from across the industries, regions, and sectors discuss challenges facing the world today, as well as solutions that the Milken Institute and its extensive network can activate. Previous calls have covered topics from vaccine development, strategic philanthropy, to market implications of the coronavirus. Stay tuned for future sessions on COVID-19, racial equity and justice, and other timely topics. Right now, I have a few housekeeping measures to point out, and then we'll get started. This call and video is being recorded and will be made available on the Milken Institute website in 1 to 2 days after today's call. Please update your name and your organization on your Zoom identification, such as Eugene Cornelius, Milken Institute. We are disabling the controls to participants, including the hand raise. If you have a question, you must submit that question to the Q&A section in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. That is the only way we can get your question to you. Now, at this time, I am honored to introduce three of the most advocates, I would say, the most outstanding and strong advocates of minority businesses in our United States. And I will introduce them in order, and I will give them each 3 to 5 minutes to say to introduce themselves and their organizations. The first is a personal favorite of mine because one of my mentors as well, is Susan Allen. And she is the CEO and National President of the U.S. Pan-Asia American Chamber of Commerce. Second is my good brother, Ron Busby, President and CEO of U.S. Black Chamber. And third but not least is Ramon Carveras, President and CEO of the United States Hispanic Chamber, who has taken the chamber to new levels and new heights and has represented the community in ways that we can never, ever appreciate. So without further ado, I would first go to Susan.
Well, thank you, Jean. Thank you so much for inviting me. Jean, this is like the family reunion. I have known you for such a long time, since the good old days when you were running the SBA program from soup to nuts, and now you are enjoying your good life in Los Angeles. And of course, today you brought two of my wonderful brothers from the Black community and Hispanic community that I have known for quite some time because we work together in strong partnership. That's right. My name is Susan L. Allen, and I am the National President and the CEO of the U.S. Pan-Asian American Chamber of Commerce Education Foundation. 2020 is the year that we celebrate our 35th anniversary, serving the fast-growing Pan-Asian American business community across the country. If you want to know what we do, just go to our website and you'll be amazed at our calendar of events. We started to celebrate our months-long 35th anniversary in July, and this will go on until the end of October. Our organization was formed to advocate for equal opportunity for the fast-growing Asian American community. And my colleague, my brother, Ramiro Cavazzo from the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce will also agree that the Asian community has become the fastest growing group in the country since the 2010 census. And we want to make sure that they have a seat at the big table. What we have done in the last 35 years is with increasing program that bring our members into the mainstream, we want to open doors and connect our members to mainstream corporations, government agencies from the federal, state, and local level, and large nonprofits who are interested in our market. They want to sell the product and services to us, and they're also interested in doing business with us. With our strong partnership with the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the U.S. Black Chamber, who are here today, and with the National NGO, National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, we have had worked for 6 years collaboratively, and our goal has been to create opportunities, cultivate relationship and bring our members to the big table so they could all have a seat at the table. I have so much more to tell you, but what I'm going to do is defer to my brothers, and then whatever they're going to say, I'm going to say amen. So Jean, thank you very much for inviting me. I look forward to the question period when we can expand more on what ideas we have in taking the economy further up the notch so that we can truly support and strengthen minority-owned businesses, which are the fastest growing community in the country, which are the backbones of the United States economy. Thanks, Jean.
Thank you. Ron?
Well, thank you, Jane, for allowing the U.S. Black Chamber to participate with this Milken Institute. I, as well as Susan, go back with you. So I am honored to be on the call with the other two organizations as we lead the minority conversation forward as it relates to Black-owned business, minority-owned businesses, Asian and Hispanic as well. Again, my name is Ron Busby, and I'm the president and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc., headquartered here in Washington, D.C. We're celebrating our 11th year of operation. When we began, Eugene, you may have remembered, we had 6 chambers at the time. Today, we have over 145 chambers. We're located in 42 states, in addition to Canada and 6 countries in Africa, with a membership base of over 332,000 Black-owned businesses. We were founded on our 5 key pillars, the first one being advocacy. Thus, that's why we're in Washington, D.C., and we're proud to wear the name of the nation's voice of Black-owned business. Our second one is access to capital, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that this morning, as it is the #1 concern for all small businesses to have access to affordable and available capital, especially in the Black community, and especially during these times. Our third one is contracting opportunities, and we really look at that from 3 different vantage points. Where is the government spending its money? Where is corporate America spending its dollars? How can we get more of our businesses engaged and involved in both of those? And then most importantly to us, where are Black people spending our money? You hear a lot about Black community having $1 trillion of spend power, but that's usually not a conversation that Black people are having. That's usually a conversation from corporate America and folk outside of our community saying, Black people have $1 trillion. How can we market to them to include ourselves in that? We're changing the conversation to say, how do we keep that within our community to help our economic conditions? Our fourth one is entrepreneurial training. And I think conversations like this that we're having this morning really allow our businesses to get the resources, the relationships, and the acumen that they need, not just to get through times like these, but to really have sustainability and the availability to grow our communities from within. And lastly is our chamber development. Again, we have 145 chambers, and we're here to make sure that they have the resources that they need to be able to grow and increase their communities as it relates to business opportunities. And we're excited. We have some really great news to share this morning, and just waiting to get into the meat of the conversation. But again, thank you to Eugene, as well as the Milken Institute, for allowing us to be here.
Thank you. Romero.
Well, thank you. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone that is tuning in to listen to us. Eugene, thank you, and the Milken Institute for the privilege and the honor to serve on this panel with my great friend Ron Busby and my great friend Susan Allen. On behalf of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, we embrace the solidarity that we have with the Black community and the Asian community to create wealth in America's economy, which is the largest economy in the world. It's been created through the innovation of our communities collectively, the sacrifice and the preparation to make sure that this dream, the American dream, is achievable for all of us through equity and equality. And so for us, since 1979, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce has been a nonpartisan nonprofit focused on creating business opportunities for what today are close to 5 million Hispanic-owned businesses. Since the early 20s, when the first Hispanic Chamber of Commerce was formed in America, we today have 250 Hispanic chambers all across America and in Puerto Rico. The most recent 2 chambers created in the last month were created in Nebraska and in Honolulu. And I wanted to say that Latinos, as many of you know, is not a race. It's an ethnic group. And so we are also Afro-Latinos and Asian Latinos, and of course, Caucasian Latinos. And so I love to tell people that being Hispanic is a state of mind. And so each of you can be Hispanic if you'd like. But we are a community that embraces all of us, especially immigrant populations who have come to this country to invest in this free enterprise system. I'll just conclude by saying that our vision during this COVID period is that sometimes storms don't just come our way to disrupt, but to clear the path forward. And I believe that our greatest years are ahead, and working closely with our friends at the Pan-Asian American Chamber and the U.S. Black Chamber, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, our membership led by our chairwoman, Carmen Castillo, herself an immigrant-owned business. We look forward to working with the Milken Institute and everyone that is helping rebuild our economy. Yes, our economy has lost 1/3 of GDP, but we believe that it needed realignment anyway, and through the civic unrest that we've seen, we need to also fight against systemic racism in our country. So we stand with Black Lives Matter and with our Asian community during this difficult period, and we need to have our voice be heard, and our confidence needs to be elevated to execute things with many non-minorities who also believe that we're headed in the right direction. So thank you for this conversation. On behalf of our U.S. Hispanic Chamber Network, Eugene, we're very grateful to you for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank each and every one of you. Now we're going to get into the meat of the conversation, because some of the things that I think is very, very important is that we really give an understanding of the impact on our communities, collectively and individually, and how this virus is changing not only our social economics, but our way we perceive ourselves and how people outside our culture perceives ourselves. So my first question to you, let's go alphabetically again. Well, Romero, we're going to really start with you because you kind of hit on it in your introduction. What was the most unexpected impact of COVID-19 on your community?
Well, for us, Eugene, the most unexpected impact for our communities was the challenge of keeping a business thriving and growing, applying for the Paycheck Protection Program to keep your workforce in place, and at the same time, the unintended consequence of everything shutting down out of necessity and having to also take care of your family at home, young or middle school age children who needed support, transitioning also. So this was not just a transition for business, but it was a transition for our quality of lives. And so the dilemma of families having to bifurcate, growing a business, keeping it alive, applying for funds to keep it active and successful, at the same time having to address personal issues, not just family members who might have the virus, but also family members who needed that adult supervision, because many of the Americans today, 50% of Americans are under the age of 40. And so we have a very young population in the Latino community, much younger than that. And so the dilemma was, how do you address this new age of working? And 84% of Latinos at the same time that are in the workforce could not work from home. So that dilemma created tremendous tension and friction, unexpected costs, family members having to support one another. during that challenging period. So the last point that was a big surprise was how interconnected we all are, Eugene. A business that had to close down, that was a restaurant, was paying rent to a landlord who perhaps was not minority, but had a note that they had to pay at the bank. And so what this has also proven to us, in addition to the family and work challenges, is also how interconnected Black, Asian, white, and brown communities are. And we can't ignore what's happening in another neighborhood, because that impact was felt immediately as businesses shut down and somebody had to conduct business. So those are two quick thoughts about the unexpected consequences, and some of them positive, in the quality of life issues that we had to address.
Right. And Ron, in your community?
I think we felt the trifecta. First, it was the COVID virus itself. And when it first came out, as a Black community, it was, well, Black people can't catch the virus, which was totally false. And the fact that we've actually seen Black people more prevalent of dying and having longer term effect from the COVID virus. So that was the first leg of the stool. The second leg was really the stimulus package and how it was written and implemented. All three of us, Romero, Susan, and myself, had the opportunity to sit at the table early on when the legislation was being created. And throughout the 700 plus pages of this bill, nowhere in there will you see the words Black, African American, Hispanic, or Asian. The only words that you see in there are small business. And so that had a huge impact on the minority community, particularly the African American community, because we were immensely affected by the way in which the stimulus package was rolled out. So we felt the second leg of the impact. And then the third leg is really, as Romero discussed, was the racism. The murder of Black men across the country was now being demonstrated and showcased on our news every day. And because of that, you are now seeing the unrest, the demonstrations of what we feel like needs to be addressed in reference to a racial conversation. And then last, in reference to just the whole payroll protection plan, we as the U.S. Black Chamber came out very early saying that we were going to lose somewhere between 35 and 40% of our businesses. And no one heard. No one wanted to listen because it was based on emotion and what we were forecasting. And then as we've all heard, Bloomberg came out months later and said, guess what? The U.S. Black Chamber did not actually hit the part. It actually was a 41% reduction in Black-owned businesses. And so we have felt it across the board. It has been unrecognizable. And I think that you will see the impacts having a longer term effect. If you really look at it, 40% of all Black revenue comes from 30 counties in America. And those 30 counties in America were the counties that got hit the hardest. And so when you try to fix bits and pieces of it without looking at the totality of it, you're going to still have the repercussions in what we're facing today. And I don't think anyone saw the long-term impact because we really thought that it was going to be addressed early on when we were talking about the potential losses and devastation that our country and our businesses were going to face.
Very, very good point. Very good point. And Susan.
Jean, to all that Romero and Ron has said, I say ditto. In the Asian community, we were affected similarly. In some ways, you guys have more egregious suffering, particularly the frontline workers in the African, Black and Hispanic community. The two major impacts that came to mind. First is that never before did we ever think that Asian Americans have played such an important role in healthcare as healthcare providers. I just learned through this that 13% of the nation's doctors are Asian American. 9% of the nation's physician assistants are Asian American. And 10% of the nation's nurses are Asian Americans. they have also bear the brunt of working hard and ignoring their own family, their own children, and stayed in the hospital and nursing homes and other healthcare facilities to take care of those who are affected by the virus. But Jean, one egregious impact that I want to share with you and the Milken Institute's supporters, followers, and future supporters and followers is that Asian Americans has been in this country for a long time. We have suffered discrimination all the way back to the 1880s. I am talking about legal immigration, that the United States actually enacted a law in 1882 specifically excluded one race, the Chinese race, from entering the country simply because they were Chinese. Throughout history, we have gone through a lot of discrimination when the United States had to build this transcontinental railroad to connect Americas east to the west to help with commerce. The Chinese were there to blast the mountains, to build the railroad, together with the Irish. And when the railroad was finished and it's time for the photo op, you know what? The Chinese were not invited. So we will not see the Chinese in that photo op at the conclusion of the transcontinental railroad construction. Fast forward to today. Within months of news that the coronavirus originated from Wuhan, China, we began to hear about anti-Asian sentiments seep into our community and began to spread and flare up and exacerbated into a national incident. 45 states have reported over 2,000 incidents of verbal harassment, verbal assault, physical assault. A woman had acid thrown in her face. A 90-year-old man had been pulled out from a store, dragged out and thrown onto the curb, simply because they looked Chinese. There were Asian American, thousands of them, were accused of being the cause of the virus, even though they were not Chinese. And even those who were Chinese, they have nothing to do with China, had never stepped foot in China. They were told to go home, go back to where you come from. And they were yelled at with four-letter words and all that. And in terms of business, many Asians have immigrated to the United States, not to work for major corporations, not to work for American corporations. They came here with their life savings and they invest and start a new business. Some borrow from families here in America, or even get support from the folks back home. And through this coronavirus, they have lost the property, they lost the business. And some may never come back again. And even the PPP program could not make them whole because the PPP program only helped them pay 80% of their wages. And with the improved program, they may get more of that, but it's only to help them keep their employees. But whatever they have invested in the business is all gone. So with the 2 million registered Asian American business in the country, I say to them, cheer up, there's hope, there's help. Because through events such as this, we are talking about supporting and strengthening minority-owned businesses with an organization like the Milken Institute. And Eugene, you've been with the SBA, you know what it's like to build minority businesses. You know what it's like to have to struggle and fight with regulations. And I want to make sure that we're all together because that's right, we are in it together. We've got to fight this and turn this around. That's right, the good news is the virus had taken the lid off of many of the problems that we have in America, taken the lid off that the Black business community is devastated. Hispanic community has been hurt. The Asian community has been discriminated and been told to get out of this country. We got to come together, and I'm glad that I have you standing beside my back, on my back.
So that's interesting. You lead me to my next question because as the virus has lifted this lid, as they say, off of all these things that have had institutionalized unconscious bias in it, if you had one chance to eliminate or to amend or to add a policy at the local, state, or national level, what would that be and why? Let's start with you, Ron. Where will we go with this?
Well, first off, I want to thank both Ramiro and Susan because they each have a unique story and challenge. And what I love about the Asian Chamber is that they understand their challenge and they came up with a solution. And I think as minority communities, we have been labeled minority. I'm not minority. I go to bed every night Black and I wake up every morning Black. I'm not a minority. And so the programs that exist currently are the MWBEs. I'm not a minority. I'm not a woman. I'm not necessarily small. I am a Black-owned business. And right now, each of us have unique challenges. But when they put us in a bucket of minority and diversity and inclusion, they try to fix all of our challenges with one brush. And I think each of us needs to make sure that we're speaking on behalf of the businesses and the communities that we represent. And so government policies as well as corporate policies have to look at it differently, because what works in the Hispanic community may not necessarily be what the Asian community needs. And what works for the women community, maybe the white woman community, is not the same needs that the Black community has. And so for years, we've allowed other agencies, other governments, and corporate America to paint a brush that we are a minority business community. Fine, I'm a Black business community, and I have special needs for my members as it relates to access to capital. They're different in our communities than what the Asian community has to deal with. As she stated, they came here with their own opportunities to create businesses. As you know, Eugene, we didn't have that option. We didn't come over here to start businesses. We were brought over here to make sure that other people's businesses had the resources that they needed, which was our labor. We worked for free for hundreds of years. So when we talk about the needs that we have, they're going to be different than any other community. And so what I would ask your listeners, your sponsors, as well as government officials, stop calling us minorities and start calling us who we are. We're Black, we're Hispanic, we're Asian. We're not minorities. In our communities, we are the majority, and you have to look at us that way. And so that would be one of my recommendations if I just had one to be able to address the needs of Black businesses.
Well said, well said. Ramiro, coming to you. How do you top that?
Well, I agree with Ron. It's hard to top that, but I agree with him that we are not minority. We are the new mainstream, according to Sol Trujillo, who's a retired corporate executive in our Latino community. We are the new mainstream of America. The Asian, the Black, and the Hispanic community is the majority of free enterprise. In our community, we represent 61 million Latinos. There are 330 million Americans, so easily 1 out of every 6 American self-identifies as Hispanic, and many of those Hispanics are also Black and Asian businesses. Susan's right, the fastest growing ethnic community in America is our Asian American population. And so each of us, along with our brothers and sisters in the African American community, need to own our power. And we are too humble. And I agree with Ron that we need to use this year, 2020, as a crucible for positive change. I think it's important for a Latino CEO of a national chamber to say that we support Black Lives Matter, because anything affecting our Black community or Asian community, do not kid yourself, will also affect the Latino community. This is a country that was built by immigrants, as Susan mentioned, and oftentimes that has been ignored in our story. Hispanics have fought. We're the only ethnic group that's fought in every major American war that this country has had. Why? Because we were here before it was America, next to the Native American population. And so, but you would not know that with the rhetoric or the dialogue today. You would have thought we just came over last night. But 80% of the 61 million Hispanic Americans are born and raised in this country. The last thing I want to mention are really two things. One is I agree with Ron that procurement and contracting and business is big business, and all of us are taxpayers to the US government. And guess what, Eugene, you know this, the largest buying service in the world is a government. It's a US government. The US Department of Defense is the largest department when it comes to procurement. And yet, less than 7% of contracting by the US government is going to Black, Asian, and Hispanic businesses and women-owned businesses and small businesses. So it is a bad economic cycle to award contracts to the same firms year in and year out and not spread the wealth to the community that you're seeking revenues from through tax dollars. And so for me, if I would change one thing, Eugene, it would be that there would be an equitable distribution of government dollars to the community that is representative in this country through federal contracting. It is something we've talked about, but as Ron said, they put the 8A program and they lump us all into that 5% opportunity window, and then they have us compete against one another, and that is not equitable. That is not fair. And guess what? We're more than 5%. You know, as I've already said, Latinos alone, we're 18 to 20% of the population. And if you add to that our African-American brothers and sisters and our Asian brothers and sisters, so it's not fair. It's a bad economic formula. And that's part of the racism and discrimination that we have in this country. I feel that the worst kind of discrimination is the color green. It's dollars that are not going into our communities.
Excellent, excellent. And just before we go into Susan, I want to remind everyone that if you have a question, this is the time to put your question in the question and answer section in the right hand bottom of your screen. The raise hand feature on your on your page is not active, so please put your questions there. Susan? Yeah.
Well, Jean, Ron and Ramir has said so much. I have so much to comment on the rich conversation. Let me give you the policy change that I would like to propose at the end, okay? But I cannot let this opportunity go without following up on all those that Ron has said and Ramiro has said. As to minority business, absolutely, Ron. I love what you say. I've been fighting this forever. Welcome to my club and my family, my ring. Come in and fight with me. There is not a National Minority Development Council. There is an Asian Development Council, the Black business, there's a Hispanic business, okay? We cannot be forced to be lumped with each other. You said it so right. You guys do not know my history, and I could never feel the depth of your pain. But I say this, I feel hair standing on my back, okay? I cannot. I did not build the railroad, but I get passionate about it, okay?
Sure.
And all that. So that's right. Cannot be one national minority. So although folks think that Asian Americans are doing well, that model minority myth, do you know that myth was put on us to put a wedge between us, the so-called Asian Americans who are quiet, smart, and never want to rock the boat, and therefore doing very well, against folks, other minorities who do not do well. That's the purpose of the model minority myth. But at the surface, it looks nice. Oh, I'm the model minority. But it hides the pressure and the contradiction this term put on us. That means if you do not fit into that myth of being smart, quiet, and not rock the boat, you don't have a place. That is the Asian American identity. Susan Allen is not that one. That's why a lot of people don't like me, because I speak out. Okay, I rock the boat. But as to the Ron, remember, we talk about government contract. Right now, all the small businesses, large, medium, and small are suffering, but small business particularly, because we don't have the access to the credit, don't have all that money, the investor who paid the bills. So we need money, we need business. And the federal government, the biggest procurer of product and services. While the big businesses are not working as hard, their engine is not churning as much, the federal government still buys. I don't know how many billion or trillion they buy. And yet, and many of the major corporations in America, the Fortune 1000 company, one of their best customers is the federal government. And they have government contract. And they're the biggest and beneficiary of government contract. Jean, you know that.
Yeah.
The federal government, the contract goes to all the major corporations. And many of them, for example, are in the $1 billion round table. And the $1 billion round table are the group of the club of corporations say, we do at least $1 billion of business with minorities. I want a policy to make them account for the claim that they do billions of dollars with minority. Who do they do business with? How much do they business with? How many of those minority business do they do business with? They have never been transparent. They make those claims. They pat each other on the shoulder. We need a policy to give them incentive to truly account for their claims. That comes to my policy, Jean. I would like to amend or add to a policy that will incentivize, let's say, major corporations to unbundle their contracts. Remember, that's the answer. Unbundle the contracts so that they can divide into smaller pieces, allow minority and small businesses the ability to bid on them. Right now, these contracts are so huge. Even if they give it to us, we can't take it. Give it to our community. It'll choke us to death. They're gonna unbundle them, find ways to do that, give them incentive, give them whatever it is, it'll make it work for them. Unbundle contract, send it down to the community, whoever they do business with, make it transparent, let the public know who are they doing business with. No more old boys, no girls club. Many of them are federal government program managers say, well, if I give this contract to the Fortune 50 company, if they fail, that's okay, it's that company. But if you give it to Eugene Cornelius, oh, if he fails, it's on me, it's my job. That mindset has no place in a fair and just society. That's what I want. Have a policy that incentivizes the unbundling of federal contract and force also the corporation to unbundle them too. They got to find a way to do that.
Yes, so to answer your question, the government spends over $500 billion a year in government services. 23% is targeted as a goal, not as a requirement, but as a goal to go to small businesses. And like you all said, those are lumped into all minorities, including women and all the groups that are represented here. Ramona, I want to thank you for bringing in our group that is not represented here, the Native American community, and we want to acknowledge that they too have suffered greatly during this crisis. One of the things that is happening here in California is there is a question with Proposition 209 related to minority procurement policy. And we are looking at and revisiting that as we speak in our states. So I think that this was very, very good that you brought out something that is consistent across each of the groups that is represented here. And that is, don't just invite us to the table, invite us to the dance. Allow us to really get in and show what we can do. And Susan, you brought up a very good point. Making contracts available to us, but restricting our ability to access to capital and to bonds, the level of bond capacity to perform these works are critical. We must work on a policy that not only gives us access to the procurement, but also gives us access to the working capital and give us access to the bond security in order to perform the job. I think those are very key issues, and thank you for bringing them up. For the sake of time and making sure that we get to the questions of our audience, I want to ask one last question before we go. What would you want the audience to know or to explore when it comes to opportunities to invest and strengthen the capacity of minority entrepreneurs and business owners. And this time I'm going to start with Susan.
Okay. I was beginning to say that the modern minority myth so the Asian American successful. They are. That's the top 10%. But do you know the biggest secret is 12.3% of the Asian Americans are living below federal poverty? Do you know that Asian Americans have replaced the Black community as the most economically divided racial group in the country? Asian Americans are the poorest. Well, let's talk about the ones who are at the higher echelon, those who have money. Investors, like many of your audience who are listening, should actually take a good look at the Asian American market, because there are folks who have money, because Asian Americans have a propensity to save, and save for the propensity for to accumulate for legacy planning. Okay, and if they are looking for people to invest in their funds, they should knock on the doors of the Asian Americans who have the money in the banking accounts. At the same time, they should also hire more equity fund managers to go into the Asian American market and look for opportunities, look for deal flows, because the Asian Americans are very creative, very innovative, particularly those who are in Silicon Valley, in Austin, in the northeastern part of the United States, and even here in Washington, DC metropolitan area in Northern Virginia. Many of them are coming up with great innovations. Recently, there is a company called Childbest. He just raised $30 million to deliver hundreds of dishes all around the country. And this is the type of opportunities that folks like your members may want to take a look at and invest. So what I say is that take a look at the Asian American community in terms of looking for funds to add to your investment portfolio. And also take a look at hiring Asian American equity managers or even equity firms to help you go and find more deals in our community, so that you can add to your portfolio with companies who have fast growth and bring you a higher, faster return on your investment.
Thank you. And Romero, you're on mute.
Thank you, Eugene. I wanted to just share that you mentioned about we want to be invited to the dance. And it's so true that when I grew up in South Texas, we grew up very bilingual, very bicultural, but the majority, as Ron was saying and Susan, was the Hispanic community along the border. And even though they've been there for 300 years, we felt very comfortable on both sides of the border. And that type of vision is important for the future. And as Hispanics or Blacks or Asians, when we get to the dance, when we get to a Fortune 500 corporate board, or we get to be CEO of a major corporation, or start our own business, or we get invited to the White House, or we get to be appointed to a cabinet, or to be CEO of the Milken Institute, there's a saying that the Italians use that when you're at the dance, you better dance. And so there are too many people that get to those opportunities, to those decision-making roles, and they shut it down. I made it, I got here, and I'm okay. I achieved my dream. But I agree with everyone that's on this call that you've got to pull people up with you. You've got to bring them to the dance with you, but you also have to dance while you're there. Be vocal, own your power, be a change agent. And I think there are many people, and I can speak for the Hispanic American community, that have become extremely successful, but they need to continue to be hungry and empowered and empower others and pull them up with them and get them also in positions of opportunity. And so, and then the second point is we can't be suffering from the imposter syndrome, where we think that we don't deserve to be there either. we need our own power. And so that's what I would say.
Excellent. And Ron?
Well, this is August, and August is Black Business Month. So to be on here with you today to talk about investing in Black communities is a powerful idea and conversation. Yesterday, the New York Federal Reserve Bank came out with a report that stated that only 1 in 10 Black businesses have a line of credit. 1 in 10. And when we do get credit, we're paying twice the rate of our white peers. So it's not just about getting credit, it's about being able to afford it when you get it. You mentioned something about the federal government and the contracts that they have and the financial opportunities and challenges. I could get a federal contract January 1st to start providing products and/or services and may not get paid till June. That's got nothing to do with me being a good business owner. That is the federal government placing that burden on that small business owner to carry the float of the federal government. So now as a small business owner, I have to go get a line of credit to cover the federal government's float. I think that is unheard of. You would not tell a corporate partner, hey, you get net 6-month payment terms. It just doesn't make any sense. Under the Obama administration, he implemented the prompt pay program, which stated if I start a job on January 1st, I can invoice you January 15th and get paid February 1st, which gives a small business owner the opportunity to make a cash flow decision on how to operate their business. These are ideas that don't take outside intervention. It really is a policy change that the federal government could literally change a switch and have implemented. The 3 of us were at the SBA and Treasury early on, and that was something that we brought to the attention when the policy and the legislation was being created, and it fell on deaf ears. When you're talking about only 10% of Black businesses have a line of credit, and you're also saying that many of us are going to grow through government contract opportunities, but I have to go pay 20% for a line of credit, that only makes it that much more difficult for me to even have equity in a contract opportunity. And then lastly, I'm going to say there's a lot of conversation going on right now about buying Black. And we're going to corporate America, and you're hearing a lot about Black Lives Matter and support Black-owned businesses. But if there's really no certification and no verification that it is a Black-owned business, then it, again, is going to fall on deaf ears. And we're also seeing a lot of trending where majority-owned firms are placing stickers that say Black-owned, or we support Black Lives Matter. And really, it's not a Black-owned business at all. They're just trying to drive business to them because it's trending right now, it's popular. And so we have got to change that conversation in reference to legitimizing who and what each one of our businesses are. And I think, lastly, as Susan stated, we have some of the best Black investment firms in the country that are doing great things with the dollars that they are investing. And many of those dollars are going back into successful Black organizations, Black nonprofits, and primarily Black-owned businesses. I will end my statement by saying we're less than 90 days away from a new election. And over the last 3 to 4 years, we heard a lot about making America great again. And as the president of the United States Black Chamber, I say I want to see a great America as well. But in order for there to be a great America, there must be a great Black America. And the only way you can have a great Black America is to have great Black businesses. And in order to have great Black businesses, you need great Black chambers, and you need financial institutions to have the resources, the acumen, and the relationships that they need to then turn around and invest in Black communities. There's a lot of conversation about social justice, criminal reform, education reform. The 3 of us are really talking about an economic agenda that has long-term sustainability and growth for our each local communities.
Now, having said that, Ron, I'm going to ask you one of the first questions from our audience, which I think is appropriate following your statement. What capital access solution would be appropriate for each of your communities?
Well, one of the things that the U.S. Black Chamber has created is we have developed a relationship with the National Bankers Association, which represents the 19 Black-owned banks, and our CDFIs. We understand that the rate for the average Black business owner is twice the rate of the average white business owner. So we have established a relationship with Liberty Bank out of Louisiana to provide access to credit through that relationship at a 9.9, so roughly the same rate as our white partners, to provide access to capital. You'll also see that many of our corporate partners have stepped up to say, hey, we're here to help, and we don't necessarily see ourselves as a government agency, so we don't know how to help. So U.S. Black Chamber, help us invest in the conversation around creating wealth for Black people. I've loved what Susan Allen has talked about in reference to the wealth of the Asian community, but the wealth gap between the white community and the Black community is really an embarrassment. The average white family has roughly $117,000 worth of wealth versus the average Black family having around $1,100 worth of wealth. And because of the pandemic, it has even seen a smaller amount of wealth for Black-owned communities. If we don't address that immediately, it's going to have a rippling effect for decades in the Black community.
Yes, and I'm going to go to Susan now. Susan, what is a capital access solution that you think would be a solution for your community?
I think many of the small businesses generally do not bank with large banks because of the process, the procedure. They love to work with community banks, and we need to make sure that community banks continue to thrive. There are organizations such as the CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institution. I do not think they are as effective as they should be. They are less transparent than I could find out. So they're more, I think we should get more transparency as to how these CDFIs are operating. They receive funds from the nation's banks to help the community, such as the local mom and pop operation, as well as the second tier of larger businesses in the community. If we can take a good look at the CDFIs and also the MDIs, such as what Ron talked about, the minority development institutions, that would be great. The banks, such as the Wells Fargo Bank, it has donated $400 million of the money it earned from processing the PPP loans. It's donated the money for the Open for Business to help the small business, which have been devastated by the virus, to get back on its feet. And yesterday, for example, we learned that the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston has started its own program, low interest rate program to help small businesses and also nonprofit to get back on their feet. I think if we can send more information about all the resources that are already there. The problem is that the community, they generally do not understand, do not read about them. They don't understand it. Sometimes they're so busy trying to put their life back together. There got to be a way to make sure that information and resources such as this are readily available and understandable. Now, for the Asian community, many of them are multi-language and they are multilingual, and they do not understand it. It's written to them in English, but it's translated in the proper languages. They would really put them back on their feet. So this is Jean, this is a longer conversation. I think it's worth another session, another hour of discussion such as this. I'm sure Ron and Ramiro can come back and we can come back with a lot more of that, of information such as that to further develop the information stream and the hows and what and when and where and why, and to keep our community not just informed, get them up to gear and utilize. There's lots of resources out there. We just get them to go and grab them and and take advantage of them.
No, I agree. We at the Milken Institute at the Center of Regional Economics is trying to look at ways of how we get connectivity into the community and the banking community with access to capital. We're trying to look for funds and ways in which we can engage at a regional level to make those things happen. I can't thank you enough, Susan, for that comment, because that's in line with our work. As we go on, I want to go to Romero. I want to look at expounding on what Susan just said, and we know that most minority businesses, for not upsetting Ron and lumping us all together, had less than 14 days dollar reserves to operate their business. What is a excess capital solution for your community that you would expound?
Well, I agree with what Ron and Susan have shared about access to capital and the empowerment that we need to have access to it. I would just add to what you're asking, Eugene, the 2 points. One is, you know this, having worked in Washington at the Small Business Administration, prior to COVID-19, we had roughly less than 1,000 SBA certified lending institutions doing 504 and 7A loans. In my experience in economic development, that multiple risk threshold that was shared between banks and the federal government and the equity of business owners was a great formula of success for building successful businesses throughout America. But today, in some ways, because of COVID-19, and the desire to have access to capital. And this was not an insolvency issue for our Asian and Black and Hispanic-owned firms. It was a liquidity issue. As you know, we had less than 27 days of available capital for many of the Hispanic-owned businesses in particular. Today, we have more than 5,000 SBA certified lending institutions. I agree with Susan that CDFIs are great, MDIs are great, but they have a capacity issue, a limitation. And so we can't just solve the problem by putting money to CDFIs, although there are more than 500 that do an amazing job and are located in our collective communities. My proposition is that we reinvent capital and provide it through financial technology firms, companies like Square and Intuit and PayPal. PayPal prior to COVID was the 10th largest lender of capital in the US. Nobody knew that. And so we need to reinvent how we provide access to capital. Traditionally in our communities, we got capital from credit cards or from family members because banks were not lending to us and they wouldn't even see us. The trust level with banks was not real high, Eugene, as you know. And so for us, what we've been telling the community is providing them technical assistance because they were not ready for accessing the Paycheck Protection Program. And two is just to be assertive and aggressive and to not take no for an answer, that if they are turned down, to keep trying and keep working. Ron mentioned there are 19 African-American banks in America. You know, we need more. We need more Hispanic-owned banks, Asian American banks, because those businesses will be more assertive and aggressive about putting capital where it needs to be. It gets back to procurement. It gets back to the less than 3% of African-American, Asian, and Hispanic serving on Fortune 500 boards, Eugene. So for us, it's empowerment. It's being at the table, but occupying that table and using it for good. I'm optimistic about the future because we have more than 5,000 people that are now, or entities that are doing access to capital, but we need to reinvent everything. And we're gonna do it beyond this COVID through technology and the digital age, Eugene. So I agree with everything Ron and Susan have said, but we need to embrace technology in our communities. And many of our communities, we've seen where they've had to put up Wi-Fi towers just to have young communities that are Black communities, Asian or Hispanic, have the ability to do their homework in communities where they don't have that digital divide is very present in our communities, and we need to bridge that divide.
Thank you. I know we have limited time, but I want to make sure that the audience knows that there's additional information on each of the topics we're talking about, not only on the individual websites of the agencies and chambers that you see before us, but also on the Milken Institute website. You can find information, research, and development that we have done on all these things and more. But the question I want to ask from the audience that I think is a very interesting question is, how do we get this conversation out to the general, and we're not in the echo chamber, that we are really making sure that we are getting this data out, this unique situations, these possibilities, these actionable items out? You know, that is why we at Milken are having these series, and we want to do this research. We want to talk about these things. We want to get this into the national conversation, but we also want to have actionable items and solutions that could take our policies further. And so we at Milken, and particularly the Center of Regional Economics and the Center for Financial Markets, are very invested in doing these kinds of operations. What would you recommend we do going forward to make sure we're outside of the echo chamber? And I'm going to go back to Susan.
I think speaking off of top of my head, first, we should reach out to the Financial Service Roundtable. Okay, by our talk today, we are putting the major corporation on the line and say, hey, you have a responsibility in terms of procurement, for example. Procurement, a major corporation are getting the big piece of the apple pie. But to get the financial component out into the open, we should reach out, Milken Institute together with us, as a result of today's session, write to the Financial Service Roundtable, the chairman, which are very strong presence in Washington, D.C. They are quite influential in Congress, and then go to the Senate and House Committee on Financial Services. Maxine Walter is the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. We can start with her, and on the Senate, find the equal counterpart there and begin to talk about that and put a policy paper there. Okay, we can put all the thought that with all the items we discussed and put them into a policy, a white paper, and send it to the Financial Service Roundtable and meet with them and say, this is what we propose. What are you going to do about that? Okay. Ask the Financial Service Roundtable, FSR, and then also go to the members of Congress, the chairman and the ranking chair of both committees in the Senate and the House. We'll start there. And a copy to Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin. That would be a great start.
Ron, your advice?
Great. Well, I think Susan hit the policy piece of it. I think where you have to start, though, here in Washington, D.C., is really transparency. Right now, there is really no data as it relates to what is happening. And when you have seen where we have come to fight, we're usually fighting on emotion, or what we have heard, or what we feel, or what we're gathering from our local chambers. But when it's data from the Milken Institute or the Federal Reserve Bank, when they spell out what is happening, then you can take data to the policy folk to have real conversations. But I think it just doesn't stop in DC. The three of us represent chambers of commerce across the country. And what I've found moving to Washington, DC is there's a huge disconnect from what happens here in DC and what happens in your local city, community across the country. And so they don't understand the relative appreciation for what we're trying to accomplish here. And so you have to really make it in layman's terms. After you've created the transparency, you created the data, then you got to get boots on the ground to understand the importance and why it means that they are going to see change and what they are actually advocating for. And so I think that's there, just like we in our local communities really missed out on a lot of the stimulus package, not because we didn't know, but because, as all of us have been saying, it wasn't really clear to the average business owner. And we don't, in local communities, don't necessarily trust what's happening here in Washington, D.C. So go to the organizations and the voices that the local communities trust. I never saw any advertisement in Black radio or Black media that talked about, hey, this is how you participate. I think it's got to come to the local business owner through local relationships and eyes and ears that they trust. And I think that's where chambers of commerce and business organizations play a critical role. It's one thing to create policy here, but elected officials really act when they're forced to act by their local constituencies and voters. That forces their hands to do things here in Washington.
Okay, and Romero, what do you think?
Eugene, I had the blessing of growing up in a family where my father was an elected official in the 60s and 70s and the 80s in South Texas. And that perspective was a big sacrifice for my family growing up, people calling at all hours of the day, people showing up at your home, needing assistance or help. But I also saw with my own eyes and embraced community service and helping others for the larger cause. And he was one of the few Hispanics at the time. He was first elected in 1961, the same year John F. Kennedy was elected president of this country. Even though the population of my community was majority Hispanic, the Hispanics were not in power. And I got to see firsthand the opportunities and the voice and the decision-making that my father provided to the community. I would encourage the best and the brightest African-American young people and the best and the brightest Asian American bright people, young people, and of course Hispanic Americans, to embrace public service and to run for office and not see it as a career path that is not a positive thing. We don't have enough people in decision-making roles in Washington, in state government, local government, as we're asking people to sign up and fill out the census. And that's a challenge as we mobilize our communities to not just embrace being medical doctors, asset managers, money managers, administrators, and leaders in the private sector for Fortune 500 companies. We need to also embrace our young people in our collective communities to run for public office and to know that that's where decision making is being done about procurement, about legislation, about governance, about who gets appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so we cannot ignore the fact that the best and the brightest in our communities today are not seeking public office. And for many reasons, as we know, it's not popular. There have been bad examples of that. But I would say and challenge ourselves to embrace all levels of opportunity, including public service, because that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where the kind of legislation and change that hasn't happened needs to happen.
Okay, so because of time, I'm going to ask one final question that I think is going to take some creativity. Okay, so here's the question. Has there been a silver lining in this crisis? And where would you go? Susan?
Indeed. This, in a way, is a blessing in disguise, although it is a curse. But it forces America to take a deep look at where we are. We have been so satisfied with our life. We allow other countries to overtake us in terms of education of our kids. You know, kids from other countries are scoring higher in tests. They are studying more engineering and nanoscience, but ours are not. We are very, very good in research, but we are very poor in putting all the good research work we have, our education institution come up with, and put them into true application and create products and services. China, for example, is very good at that. So the need for PPE when the virus hit us show us how badly we have been relying on foreign help in producing the basic need of our country, and all this is making us taking a look at very deep inside our own operation in our life as to what is it that we are doing right, what is it that we're doing wrong, why are we not taking care of our own community, why are we taking care of people outside the country, creating all this wonderful opportunity, building the roads and keeping the peace and tranquility, whereas we are at home in a turmoil. And in terms of doing business, how business is being conducted, how our personal relationship, mental health, all these things are coming to the fore now. And I think the silver lining is Americans are looking at themselves and say, where do I go from here? From a personal relationship to professional relationship to how I run my business vis-a-vis how other countries are running their country and the business.
Thank you. Okay, Ron and Romero, I'm going to have to say we got to move quickly. We're over time. So Ron, let's go.
I think two things. One, we lost 450 million Black-owned businesses. That's the bad news. But the good news is many of those businesses had customers, clients, vendors. We have got to, in our local communities, not lose that revenue. We've got to do mergers, joint ventures, consortiums to ensure that Black businesses can now grow through acquisitions so that we can continue to prosper. Secondly, fact, 330 million Americans, 18,200,000 white millionaires. Between the three organizations that are on the phone, we each represent 8% of the millionaires in this country. 76% of all millionaires are white men. 8% are Hispanic, 8% are Asian, and 8% are Black. That's a tragedy that needs to be addressed. The U.S. Black Chamber is saying we have got to create more millionaires to create more wealth to keep this country afloat, particularly from the minority communities.
Okay, and Romero.
Eugene, I'll quote the former mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, that you never let a serious crisis go to waste. And what he meant by that is it's an opportunity to do things that you could not do before. And I agree with him that, and with many, that there is a silver lining, and we can do great things this year that we've never thought possible, because there is unrest, there is dislocation, there is conflict, and there is a desire for permanent change. And so we just need to put a plan in place. Another quote by an individual who's no longer with us, but Mark Twain said, "A vision without a plan is a hallucination." And I believe that collectively, the Black, Asian, and Hispanic community, working with people with the Milken Institute, we need to put a very effective plan. And since changes of the order, and there is a silver lining, we need to create change that's permanent and to recalibrate this country so the equity that Ron, Susan, and I want in our communities, collective communities, is provided. We need to fight against systemic racism and discrimination. It exists. We have a generational, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make a permanent change using this opportunity of this crisis.
Okay, well, I want to thank each and every one of our esteemed panelists for your input today. Our conversation was so intense, we actually went over our allotted time, but I just couldn't bring myself to bring it to a close.
We went so long, I need a haircut.
I want to thank our audience for participating and being online to hear this Zoom conversation. I hope that each and every one of you listening in our panel tune into the Milken Institute website. We have a newsletter that goes out on a regular basis. We have the Hill Report, and we have different issues regarding different centers, from Faster Cures to Center for Aging to Center for public health. We are very active and very supportive. I encourage you to link to the Milken family. Make sure each and every one of you link to the websites of our individual chambers here. And thank you all for participation. With that, I say adieu.
Thank you.
Eugene. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.